The hall was silent. Not a cough, not a whisper. Every camera fixed on one young man standing at the center of the African Union's marble chamber. He wasn't holding a script. He wasn't reading a diplomatic note. He simply said, "Faut qu'on soit ensemble." We must be together. For a moment, those words seemed almost too simple, but they cut through decades of formality, division, and silence like a blade. Here stood a man from a land often dismissed as poor Burkina Faso, speaking with the weight of a continent behind him. He was not asking for help. He was reminding Africa who it truly was. He spoke of the shame of silence when Libya burned. He spoke of brothers turning against brothers, and he asked the question that many in that room had avoided for years. What would have happened if Africa had stood united when NATO came for Libya? No one answered, but everyone knew this was not the usual African Union speech filled with polite applause and technical jargon. This was a reckoning, a mirror held up to the soul of the continent. It was a call to unity, to rebuild from within, to create weapons industries and dreams made in Africa for Africans. The man's name was Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the transitional president of Burkina Faso, the same leader who has turned the world's gaze back toward Africa's courage. His message was clear: if Africa does not defend itself, no one will. So tonight, stay with me till the end of this video, because what was said in that hall might redefine not only Africa's future, but how the entire world understands power, dignity, and unity. Do you believe that Africa can still rise as one voice, or is that dream too far gone? If you think truth matters more than headlines, subscribe, share, and let's uncover what really happened inside that room. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré rose to speak at the African Union's gathering that day, few expected fireworks. After all, AU meetings had long been predictable rituals, long speeches, polite applause, vague resolutions that gathered dust before the ink even dried. But not this time. Traoré didn't begin with numbers, reports, or slogans. He began with a confession, a wound he refused to hide. When Libya was attacked, we looked away, he said softly. We failed to defend our own. The room fell still. Delegates from Senegal, Ghana, South Africa, even Nigeria avoided his gaze. Because everyone knew the destruction of Libya in 2011 was not only the fall of a country, it was the beginning of Africa's new submission. It was the night when African skies were filled with foreign jets and African voices were silent. Then Traoré did something almost unthinkable in such a formal setting. He called out the hypocrisy within. How can we speak of integration, he asked, when one African nation can be used to attack another? He paused, then turned toward the foreign ministers of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, seated together the leaders of the newly formed Alliance of Sahel States AES. You stood together when others wanted to invade Niger. You said if you attack one, you attack us all. That was the first lesson of African solidarity in decades. Those words changed the air in the hall. For the first time in years, applause came not from protocol, but from conviction. But Traoré didn't stop there. He shifted the focus to what he called the unfinished revolution, the need to reform the economic community of West African states. ECOWAS, once seen as a bridge for unity, now regarded as a tool for elite interest and Western influence. ECOWAS cannot remain a club of ministers in suits, he declared, whose children study abroad while their people suffer. If it does not reform, it will die. It was blunt, almost brutal, but it was true. Across the continent, ordinary Africans had begun to see ECOWAS not as a shield, but as a shadow of foreign policy. Then came a proposal that silenced the critics. Traoré called for the creation of a continental defense industry made by Africans for Africans. How can we respect ourselves, he asked, when we cannot even make our own bullets? We import toothbrushes, we import wheat, we even import dreams. That must end. His message was not isolationist. It was revolutionary. He didn't call for Africa to close its doors. He called for Africa to stand upright, to speak from a position of equality, not dependency. Sovereignty, he said, does not mean isolation. It means balance. It means respect. He urged the African Union to adopt a continental security charter, one that forbids any African state from supporting the aggression of another. We must restore the sacred principle, he said. No African shall raise his weapon against his brother. Behind him, a large digital map of the continent glowed, 54 nations, 1.4 billion people, and a single voice calling for unity. He reminded them that Africa is the youngest continent on Earth, average age 19, yet still ruled by systems designed half a century ago. If we continue like this, he warned, we will still be debating while others decide our fate. For many in the room, this was more than a speech. It was a mirror. It forced them to confront decades of political dependence and moral inertia. And as Traore finished that section of his address, a veteran diplomat from East Africa whispered to a colleague, This feels like the day Sankara returned." The tension in the hall was electric. Cameras zoomed closer, diplomats leaned forward, translators hesitated mid-sentence as if afraid to interrupt history in motion. Captain Ibrahim Traoré's tone shifted, no longer the calm analyst, but a man standing on the edge of revelation. "We must face the truth," he said, voice rising. "For too long we have been the continent of excuses, not because we lacked strength, but because we lacked courage." Then came the moment no one expected. Traoré pointed directly to the African seats in the United Nations Security Council, those who had once voted to sanction his own country and Mali. "When the West wanted to punish us, he said some of you voted with them. You called it diplomacy. I call it betrayal." Gasps rippled across the room. Never in recent AU history had a leader so openly rebuked his peers on live television. But Traoré's gaze did not waver. He recalled how when Niger was threatened with invasion in 2023, Burkina Faso and Mali stood up and declared that an attack on one would be an attack on all. For the first time in modern Africa, he thundered, "We saw unity through courage, not paperwork. That is the Africa we must defend." The applause that followed was hesitant at first, then thunderous. Delegates who had been silent for years began to clap, to rise, to nod. Yet the captain's voice only grew more intense. "You want to know why the world does not respect Africa?" he asked. "Because we are poor, and as long as we remain poor, no one will respect us." He paused, letting the silence sink in, then raised a finger toward the former Chinese ambassador sitting nearby. "There was a time," he said, "when China was mocked. They said, 'lucky like a Chinaman,' meaning doomed. But today they rival the United States. Why? Because they eradicated poverty." The message was clear. Africa's dignity would only come through work, not words. He proposed what he called an African Continental Initiative to end poverty, combining local industry education and self-financing through natural resources. It was radical, but practical. Outside the hall, the world was already reacting. Within hours, clips of his speech went viral on TikTok, X, and YouTube. Hashtags like "Our Africa Must Unite" and "Ninon Traore Doctrine" trended across the continent. Young Africans from Nairobi to Dakar called it the speech our grandparents waited for. But not everyone applauded. In Western capitals, the reaction was cautious, even alarmed. French analysts on television described his tone as dangerously populist. An American think tank labeled his vision a step toward regional militarism. But among ordinary Africans, those words sounded more like fear that Africa was finally waking up. In neighboring Mali and Niger, spontaneous rallies erupted in the streets. People carried banners reading, "If you attack Niger, you attack us all. We make our own destiny." Even journalists in South Africa, long skeptical of Sahel politics, called the speech a rebirth of Pan-African honesty. Back inside the AU hall, Traoré's final crescendo shook even the marble walls. "Do not think we are weak because we seek peace. But if you attack one of us again, if you violate our soil, our dignity, our children's future, we will respond as one continent." The applause was no longer polite, it was defiant. Delegates rose to their feet, some chanted, others wept quietly. For the first time in decades, the African Union felt less like a bureaucracy and more like what it was meant to be, a heartbeat. When the young president stepped down from the podium, an elderly statesman from Tanzania leaned over and whispered almost in disbelief, This is the Africa I dreamed of in 1963. And somewhere in the echoing hall, the name Ibrahim Traoré began to sound less like that of a soldier and more like the spark of a new continental consciousness. The morning after Traoré's speech, Africa was no longer the same. The newspapers across the continent didn't debate what he said, they debated what it meant. In Ouagadougou, radio stations replayed his words every hour. In Bamako, students painted "Unity or Nothing" on university walls. In Niamey, a crowd gathered before dawn waving hand-painted banners, "One Africa, one defense, one destiny." It was as if a generation that had grown up believing in aid and dependency suddenly remembered the power of their own hands. For the first time in years, the conversation on African social media wasn't about football or celebrity gossip. It was about policy, poverty, and pride. Farmers in northern Ghana posted videos showing homemade tractors. Young engineers in Rwanda discussed open-source software for African defense technologies. Even small business owners in Côte d'Ivoire began adding Made in Africa labels to their products with renewed pride. But the impact wasn't only emotional, it was institutional. Within weeks, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger formally presented a joint proposal to the African Union, the creation of a permanent African Security Council made up of elected representatives from regional alliances, not foreign-sponsored committees. It was a direct challenge to the old guard of ECOWAS and the long-standing dependency on French and American military coordination. The ripple reached far beyond the Sahel. In Kenya and Uganda, lawmakers began debating the need for a local defense industry. In Ethiopia, universities organized symposiums on the Traore doctrine. In Senegal, opposition leaders quoted his line, "Sovereignty does not mean isolation," as a rallying cry against IMF austerity. But not everyone was pleased. Inside the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa, some diplomats warned that Traore's tone could destabilize delicate relationships with Western donors. One anonymous official was quoted saying, "He speaks the truth, but the truth has consequences." Indeed, the consequences came swiftly. France announced a review of its military and economic agreements with the Sahel states. The European Union froze several cooperation funds under the pretext of security concerns. The IMF quietly delayed a series of financial disbursements. Yet instead of bending under pressure, the Sahel Alliance responded with composure. Burkina Faso's foreign minister issued a statement, "We will no longer measure progress by how much money we borrow, but by how much dignity we restore." That single sentence went viral, again reaffirming the tone of the new era. Politically, the balance of power within the AU began to shift. Countries that had long kept silent, Togo, Guinea, Sudan, started aligning more closely with the AES bloc. A quiet yet powerful idea was spreading: Africa could govern itself by its own rules. Civil society followed. Grassroots movements emerged across West Africa, demanding reforms in education and industrialization. Young activists called for African standards in manufacturing technology and healthcare, a phrase inspired directly by Traore's line, "We import even our dreams." That must end. Meanwhile, outside Africa, global observers began to take note. The New York Times described the speech as the beginning of Africa's ideological realignment. Al Jazeera called it the most honest moment in the African Union's history. But perhaps the most profound reaction came not from media or governments, it came from the people. For millions of ordinary Africans, farmers, teachers, mechanics, the speech wasn't about politics. It was about belonging. A man from Tanzania summed it up in one comment that went viral: "We don't want to be saved anymore. We want to stand." That single sentiment captured the heart of the revolution. Traore had unleashed a revolution not of weapons, but of willpower. In Washington, the words of Ibrahim Traoré didn't go unnoticed. Within 24 hours of his speech, the U.S. State Department held a quiet, closed-door briefing. Officially, it was called a Regional Stability Review. Unofficially, it was damage control. For decades, Africa had been described in policy papers as a zone of interest, not a center of power. But Traoré's declaration that Africa would produce its own weapons, define its own alliances, and decide its own future was something entirely new. It wasn't anti-American, it was post-American. American analysts were split. The old guard diplomats warned that Burkina Faso and the Sahel Alliance were drifting toward Russian influence. But younger voices inside think tanks like the Brookings Institution and the Carnegie Endowment saw something deeper. One analyst wrote, "This isn't about East or West anymore. This is about the global South asserting adulthood." Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Paris was shaken. France's foreign minister tried to downplay the speech, calling it symbolic rhetoric. Yet, behind the scenes, French military officials recognized the threat not a military one, but an ideological one. Because for the first time in half a century, France was no longer seen as the guardian of Francophone Africa, but as the ghost of a system Africa was finally exorcising. European media framed the moment cautiously. Le Monde called it a continental awakening. The Guardian wrote, "The words of Traoré have cracked open the myth of Africa's eternal dependency, but in Berlin and Brussels, the tone was pragmatic." Policy advisors began discussing how to adapt cooperation to the new African assertiveness. China, by contrast, responded with a smile. Its foreign ministry praised the maturity and confidence of African leadership. Chinese newspapers emphasized a phrase that resonated deeply: "Sovereignty does not mean isolation." To Beijing, it sounded like an open invitation, a continent ready to negotiate on equal terms, not under the shadow of old powers. Across Latin America and Asia, the reaction was emotional. Commentators from Brazil to Indonesia compared Traoré's message to the early voices of anti-colonial liberation. In Bolivia, one newspaper headline read, simply, "Africa is speaking our language again." And then came the global public. Millions outside Africa began to question why the continent's voice had been missing for so long. American church groups, Pan-African associations, and university students shared the full speech online, subtitled, translated, debated. For the first time in years, Africa wasn't a story of crisis, but a story of courage. Still, not everyone was at ease. In Pentagon reports and European strategy papers, a new term began to appear: African sovereignty movement. It wasn't an official bloc yet, but the fear was clear. The West had built its global dominance on Africa's silence. Now Africa was speaking. And perhaps the most powerful reaction came from ordinary Americans watching the clips on YouTube. For many of them, hearing Traoré speak about poverty, unity, and dignity struck something familiar, something deeply human. "He sounds like one of our founding fathers," one viewer commented. Another wrote, "I don't know much about Africa, but this man reminds me what leadership sounds like." It was ironic that in a time when global trust in Western leadership was fading, a young African soldier was reminding the world what moral authority could mean again. As the echoes of his words faded through the marble hall of the African Union, the cameras stopped rolling. But the silence that followed felt heavier than applause. It was the kind of silence that comes when a truth too long buried has finally been spoken aloud. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't just give a speech that day, he issued a warning not only to Africa, but to the world. "If we continue on this path," he said, "others will decide our destiny again." It wasn't anger that filled his voice. It was fatigue, the exhaustion of generations who had carried the weight of colonial ghosts and economic chains even after the flags changed. He spoke for a continent tired of being told to wait. And yet his message was not bitter. It was hopeful. He reminded his peers that Africa's strength lies not in its gold or oil, but in its people, its 1.4 billion souls, its 19-year-old heartbeat, its capacity to dream again. "We are not a continent of victims," he said, "but of vision." That single phrase now circles the world on walls, in classrooms, in forums. But it also raises a deeper question for all of us watching from afar. If Africa, long exploited, can still believe in its renewal, what excuse does the rest of the world have for giving up on integrity, unity, and truth? Because Traoré's revolution isn't only African, it's human. It challenges every nation, every generation to ask who truly governs our future: courage or convenience. And perhaps that's why his speech resonated beyond borders, because it reminded us that sovereignty in its purest form begins with self-respect. It's not just about nations. It's about people reclaiming the dignity to think, to choose, to build. So tonight, as we look back on that historic day in Addis Ababa, let us remember the next great revolution may not begin with armies or elections, but with a single continent deciding to believe in itself again. Do you think Africa is finally ready to define its own destiny, or will the old powers silence it once more? If you believe that truth matters more than headlines and that dignity is the first step toward peace, then share this video. Because somewhere out there, another young leader may be listening, waiting for proof that the world still has room for courage. Please share if you believe that Africa deserves to define its own destiny. And subscribe if you believe that the truth is more important than the headlines.